After the Ottomans won the Battle of Kosovo, the Hungarians remained as the major force against the Ottomans in the Balkans. When Bulgaria was conquered and Serbia was taken under Ottoman protection, the Turkish border had reached Hungary. The growth and strengthening of the Ottoman Empire with the conquest of the Anatolian principalities intimidated the Hungarians. The Hungarian king Sigismund knew that the Ottomans, who were steadily growing in size and strength and raiding a new piece of territory in Rumelia every day, would one day overrun Hungary. If measures were not taken on a large scale, and if the Christian zeal was not acted upon, what happened to Bulgaria or Serbia could also happen to Hungary. It was necessary not only to stop the Turks but also to expel them from Europe, and this could be done by none other than the united Crusader forces. With this in mind, the Hungarian king Sigismund sent envoys to various European countries asking for soldiers for the Crusader army to be formed. The Pope also became Sigismund's biggest supporter by preaching in favor of forming a Crusader army in many places. Roman emperors had already been asking for help from Europe for a long time. When Constantinople was besieged, Emperor Manuel's request for help from European states and his declaration that he would take part in the Crusader army to be established reinforced Sigismund. The widespread support for Sigismund's request, especially from France, was instrumental in organizing the Crusader army as soon as possible. Wherever Sigismund applied for the organization of the Crusader forces, he received positive answers from almost all of them. Holy Roman Empire, Kingdom of France, Kingdom of England, Kingdom of Hungary, Kingdom of Poland, Republic of Venice, Republic of Genoa, Castile, Aragon, Bohemia, Savoy, Burgundy, Kingdom of Croatia, Wallachia, Hospitaller, Kingdom of Navarra, Teutons. Bulgarians and all Christian states pledged their support to this Crusader alliance. The Crusader spirit, still alive, was now rekindled. Crusaders from various nations came to Hungary and started to gather under the command of Sigismund, who was the instigator and organizer of the crusade. According to Western sources, the Crusader army gathered in Budin had reached 120,000. When Mircea, the Wallachian voivode of Wallachia, who was looking for an opportunity to get rid of Ottoman protection, announced that he would join the campaign with a force of 10,000 men, the Crusader army reached an enormous number. The Crusaders, overconfident due to their large numbers and dreaming of expelling the Turks from Europe, were to march in two columns. The main column of the Crusader army, led by the Hungarian king Sigismund, first marched towards Serbia, reached the Danube Valley, and then moved towards the city of Nicopolis. On the way, the Crusaders did not hesitate to repeat their old customs and brutally slaughtered defenseless civilians and captured prisoners. The French, led by John the Fearless, Count of Neva, had set out from Budin and traveled through Erdel to Wallachia. Here they met Mircea, the Wallachian voivode. In early September 1396, the Crusaders arrived in front of Nibolu and besieged the city. The Hungarian king Sigismund addressed the Christian warriors, who were composed of famous knights, princes from royal dynasties and elite soldiers. Whether Sultan Bayezid comes or not, next summer we will pass through the kingdom of Armenia, enter Syria, and take the gates of Beirut from the Arabs. We will take the city of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. If the Sultan comes against us with all the military might he can muster, we will fight him. By dying in battle, it will be possible to receive God's grace. Sigismund, who was so high-minded as to promise the Crusaders the conquest of the Holy Land, believed that Bayezid was going into Anatolia and gathering forces from various Muslim tribes. When Bayezid learned of the movement of the Christian forces led by the Hungarian king, He ended the siege of Istanbul and ordered the Anatolian and Rumelian troops to gather immediately in Edirne. He himself was on his way with 10,000 combatants. While the Anatolian soldiers under the command of Kara Timurtash Pasha and the princes quickly gathered and moved to Rumelia, the Rumelia soldiers rushed to Edirne. The great scholar and historian Shamseddin Muhammad al-Jazari, who was highly respected and esteemed by Bayezid, was also in this army with Bayezid. Al-Jazari, who gave very valuable information about the Battle of Nicopolis in his work, said that Bayezid's army was very small compared to the Crusader army in terms of its hasty gathering. When the army finally met Bayezid in Edirne, Bayezid immediately gave the order to move forward. When Nicopolis was besieged by the Crusaders, Doğan Bey was the commander of the castle. He was a commander trained in the battles along the frontiers. Bayezid the Thunderbolt Khan was most curious about what Doğan Bey was doing and what he was planning to do. He had great confidence in Doğan Bey, but he was afraid that Doğan Bey would give up the defense in the face of the enemy's unexpected numbers and their inability to send him any news. Because there was a disproportion of strength against the enemy beyond any measure, and therefore without help, the castle could not be expected to hold out for a long time. For all these reasons, a messenger had to be sent to Doğan Bey. Evrenuz Bey was sent to reconnoiter with some raiders and brought the news that the castle was surrounded by an enormous army. It seemed impossible to break through the enemy ranks and approach the castle. Meanwhile, the Turkish army had moved to within 10 kilometers of Nicopolis and set up camp. Bayezid the Thunderbolt thought long and hard. One by one he considered those who could do the job. However, he did not have the patience to wait until there was news, so he decided to take on this dangerous task himself. He secretly mounted his horse and rode on, taking advantage of the darkness of the night. Gliding through the passage points he knew, he passed through the enemy ranks and reached the castle walls. "Bey Doğan! Bey Doğan!" he called out. Doğan Bey, who was in the castle and on guard, heard this and recognized the voice of His Holiness. But he could not believe his ears. What was His Majesty doing here? But the same voice rose again. "Bey Doğan!" Doğan Bey jumped on the bastion of the castle like crazy with joy. He had been under siege for days. He had not been able to send news about his situation, nor had he heard from Hunkar. He immediately bent down from the bastion. Then, in the twilight of the night, he recognized Bayezid Khan standing on his horse like a statue of victory. His excited voice broke the silence of the night. "Here you are, Your Majesty." "Bey Doğan, what is your condition?" Doğan Bey reported that the enemy had been pressing the castle from the river and land for a week, but that the veterans, confident that their sultan would come and catch up with them, had held out and that the castle was strong and the supplies were plentiful. Bayezid Khan said for the last time, "Hold on, even we have arrived." After calling out, he rode his horse into the darkness. Meanwhile, the Crusaders had heard the voices and pursued Bayezid the Thunderbolt with a detachment of cavalry. But before they could get closer, Bayezid the Thunderbolt Khan had disappeared. The next day, the Ottoman army confronted the Crusader army with all its might. Sigismund was surprised to see the Ottoman Sultan suddenly standing in front of the Crusaders at the head of his army when he was supposed to be in Anatolia. The Hungarian king had an idea about the war capabilities of the Turks. The Turks were not the kind of people who could be scared away from the battlefield with 1 or 2 cavalry charges. Therefore, he asked all the commanders, especially John the Fearless, to consult with him. At the meeting to determine the battle plan, Sigismund first suggested that a reconnaissance should be carried out to find out the situation of the Turks and to sense Bayezid's intentions. He wanted the Wallachian and Hungarian infantry to be put forward first to resist Bayezid's attacks, and the knightly cavalry to attack after them in order to ensure the infantry's success. But the knights strongly objected to this idea of the Hungarian king. The commander of the French knights, 22-year-old Jan the Fearless, and Marshal Boucicaut rushed into battle first, saying that Sigismund did not want to lose the honor of defeating the Turks to the French. Due to the objections of the knights of Western Europe, especially the French, Sigismund had to sacrifice his own opinion to theirs. On the morning of September 25, 1396, when the Crusader army of 130,000 men gathered from all over Europe and the Ottoman army of half that number faced each other, the order of battle of the Ottoman army was as follows. The first line was manned by Azap troops consisting of light infantry under the command of Saruka Pasha. On the right flank was Prince Suleiman Çelebi at the head of the Rumeli cavalry. On the left flank was the Beyler Bey of Anatolia at the head of the Anatolian cavalry, and in the center were the Janissaries and Anatolian infantry. Further back, hidden, were the Ottoman mounted Janissaries and reserves. In contrast to the Ottoman order of battle, which placed infantry in the front lines and left the decisive outcome to the mounted soldiers, the Crusader army's organization, which placed the decisive outcome on foot soldiers, was as follows. The first line consisted of French, English, and German mounted knights. In the center of the second line, Sigismund led the Hungarian, Bohemian, Rhodian, and Polish troops, with the Croats under Stefan Laskovic on his right, and the Vlachs under Mircea, the Wallachian voivode, on his left. In the rear, the reserve forces were backed up against the fortress of Nicopolis and the Danube. This great square battle in front of Nicopolis started with the attack of the French, German, and English knights on horseback. In the face of the sudden attack of the knights, Ottoman light infantry soldiers suffered considerable casualties. The Azabs were slashed by the swords of the armored knights and began to retreat while suffering casualties. As the battle unfolded to the Ottomans' detriment, the knights, thinking that they had secured the victory, became very zealous. Following the battle very closely, Bayezid the Thunderbolt ordered the second line behind the Azabs to retreat to the flanks. While the Ottoman army was in a crescent position, the knights, who thought that they had achieved a decisive result, ignored Sigismund's orders not to advance any further and did not hesitate to advance further. The knights, eager for victory, crested the hill in front of them and encountered the third line of Lightning's forces. Another danger was the stakes at the bottom of the hill. As the horsemen rode down the slope towards the stakes, they were pressed by the horsemen coming from behind and could not stop, so they rode fast towards these stakes. Suddenly the knights on horseback, finding themselves between the stakes, were forced to dismount. Thus, a terrific rain of arrows began to fall on the knights on foot. These arrows caused great casualties among the knights. Bayezid then ordered the third and second lines to deliver the finishing blow. Pinned down on all sides, the knights of Western Europe suffered enormous losses. Meanwhile, Sigismund, who was watching the situation from the Crusader camp, was unaware of the fate of the knights coming down the hill. He sent a cavalry unit from the center to support them and inform them of the situation. However, horsemen from the Ottoman right and left flanks attacked this unit and neutralized it in a short time. Within 3 hours of the start of the battle, some of the knights had perished, and some had been captured. This caused panic in the Crusader camp. Not a single one of the knights, whom they thought had won victory, had returned. Having thus completed the first battle, Bayezid brought out his entire army. When the Crusaders saw that the Ottoman army had emerged victorious against the knights, and that their numbers had even increased, they were terrified. Bayezid the Thunderbolt led the entire army, including the reserves, on the offensive to deliver the finishing blow. Sigismund, who was trying to put up a last stand against the Ottoman army, had brought all his troops, including the reserves, into the battle. But the Ottomans had the psychological advantage. Mircea, the head of the Crusader left wing, realized that the situation was a rout. Not wanting to lose any more soldiers, he immediately left the battlefield with his army. Seeing the Vlachs retreat from the battlefield, the morale of the other troops was shattered. When the defeat of the Crusader army became obvious, Laskovic, the commander of the right wing, withdrew from the battlefield with his army. These and the rest of the forces that escaped were either killed or captured. Most of the Hungarians who tried to retreat drowned in the Danube. The Hungarian King Sigismund was saved by the efforts of the German nobles in his entourage. He boarded a Venetian ship with the chief of the Knights of Rhodes and immediately left the land. Sigismund, who had boasted, "If the sky were to collapse, we would hold it with our spears," and ranted a lot against the Turks, looking at the enormous number of his army as he was coming to Nibelu with his crowded Crusader army, immediately asked for the sails to be inflated after he boarded the Venetian galley and sailed away from there. Admiral Jean de Vienne, Guy de la Trémol, Philippe de la Barre, and many other French, Flemish and Bavarian noblemen were killed in the Battle of Nibolu, which resulted in a decisive Ottoman victory. Many others were captured by the Ottomans, including the Count of Neva, known as Jan the Fearless, and Marshal Boucicaut. The Great Crusader Army, which the entire Christian world had prepared by mobilizing all their means to expel the Ottomans from the European continent, could not even resist Bayezid the Thunderbolt Khan. Bayezid the Thunderbolt spared the lives of the noble captives and informed them that they could be freed by paying a ransom. Among the captives was John the Fearless, the grandson of the King of France and the French commander who first attacked the Ottoman army at Nicopolis. Jan the Fearless, who had met the Turks for the first time at the Battle of Nicopolis, had sworn, "If I am saved, I will never fight the Turks again." When his ransom was to be paid and he was to be released, Yildirim, while granting the French nobleman his freedom, said to him, "Jan, you swore you would not use arms against me. I return this oath to you. If you want to fight me again when you return to your homeland, you can invite all the monarchs of Europe into alliance. The more allies and the bigger the army you can gather, the bigger the victory will be. Be sure that you will always find me on the battlefield against you, for I was born to spread the religion of Allah, Swadeari, and to attain His pleasure." Following the victory at Nicopolis, Yildirim Bayezid returned to Edirne. On the one hand, he sent raiders against Mircea, the Wallachian voivode who had betrayed him, and on the other hand, he sent one raiding force against Albania, another against Vidin, and another against Hungary. As a result of these campaigns, Vidin was captured and the Bulgarian kingdom was completely ended. Albania was annexed to the Ottoman Empire. The raiders who went to Hungary captured many booty and prisoners. In the meantime, Some European governments feared that the Turks had started to invade Central Europe. Evrenuz Bey, who had entered Wallachia, was defeated by Mircea on the plain of Rovine. Upon this news, Yildirim Bayezid immediately moved with his army against Wallachia. When Mircea heard that Yildirim was coming with his army, he became frightened and offered his obedience to the Sultan. Bayezid then left him in place on the condition that Wallachia would become an Ottoman protectorate and pay taxes. Because news of betrayal had come from Anatolia. When Karamanolu Alaaddin Ali Bey learned that the Crusaders were attacking the Ottomans with a large army, he predicted that the Ottomans would surely be defeated by the Crusaders and took action. During Bayezid's struggle against his enemies in Nicopolis, Alaaddin Bey had advanced to Ankara and captured Sarı Timurtaş Pasha. But when the Battle of Nicopolis resulted in Bayezid the Thunderbolt's decisive victory, Alaaddin Ali Bey became frightened. He immediately released Sarı Timurtaş Pasha. He apologized to him with valuable gifts and asked the Sultan to intercede on his behalf and to tell him that he was begging for forgiveness and forgiveness for his outrageous behavior. He also wrote a letter of servitude and devotion and gave it to him. Bayezid the Thunderbolt had not even heard the story. With great anger, he addressed Karamanoglu's envoy as follows: "From now on, it is this flaming sword that will separate right from wrong, mischief from truth.